All right. So this is all about spirituality, nurturing your spiritual health, so we'll talk a little bit about what that means. Spirituality and religion are often used interchangeably, right? You see it that way in the literature when people talk about it, just in conversation, but they're actually two different concepts. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how they differ, how we conceptualize these two things differently. So, one way to think about it is spirituality is a journey, it's a process, it's a personal quest to define meaning, fulfillment, purpose, and satisfaction in life. Where religion is more so the map, right? How do I get to the answers of those questions? How do I live? And religion usually provides a code of conduct that integrates beliefs and values, a tradition or system of worship that provides rituals, answers, or norms. And it is more defining about what one should believe. But the reason why I think they're used interchangeably, at least this is my take on it, because they have some commonalities. You can see the Venn diagram here that shows that spirituality is more broad and individualized and it has less direction than religion. But both of these have commonalities. It drives our beliefs, our moral compass, it provides comfort, it provides boundaries around reflection, our ethics, and it also helps us cultivate awe. You can be both or you can consider yourself one or the other. This is really, really individualized. So, religion, most people can think of particular religions and religious practices, but spirituality, again, the practices are less defined. Religion, we know Islam, Muslim, Christianity, so forth and so on. But spirituality really could be practices that include a number of things. It can be beliefs and finding energy from things outside of yourself, like energy, like art, like nature, like social connectedness, knowledge, practices that are spiritual in nature can be prayer or meditation. And, when we have our discussion, I hope to hear more about how you all define these concepts and the practices that you all use to align yourself with spirituality or religion. Next, please. So, I'm in the health field, so I'll speak a little bit from my health perspective. So, historically, the way that we thought about people in the health system, that was sort of framed by the medical model. When you go to the doctor, they say, okay, you have MS, let's talk about MS. And so around 1977, there was, I consider a groundbreaking publication by a medical doctor named Engel. And he said, I think the medical field has this all wrong. Like, we should not look at just the disease, that we should look at some of these other aspects that influence how people are their health profiles, essentially. So Engel came out with the biopsychosocial model of health. It's a mouthful, but basically that we need to look more then we need to look beyond biological factors such as, the disease process or genetics, but we need to understand really who this person is. We need to understand their psychology, the social factors that this person experiences, their lived experiences. And then years later, probably around 2002, a guy named Sulmasi said, yeah, the biopsychosocial model of health is great, especially when we're looking at, chronic disease. But there's a component missing here, and that's spirituality. We know spirituality is critical to how people cope and navigate life and conditions. And so, not most people, when they think about the relationship between spirituality and health, they think about, well, someone is diagnosed with a chronic condition or, someone is having a health challenge, and that they maybe will find God to help them make meaning of what all is happening, or maybe they're angry with God. But with more research and more literature and more attention to sort of this more comprehensive model, we know that spirituality and health are linked in so many different ways. And I'll go through this picture with you. So you'll see this circle, and then there's arrows in the middle of the circle, which basically simplify the fact that these things are interrelated and they interact simultaneously. And they're, these are dynamic relationships, but Spirituality, as we discussed, really describes how someone finds meaning and purpose, and it's individualized, right? It's not scripted. And spirituality is linked to our health in many, many pathways. So spirituality is linked through our health through a cognitive pathway, right? So if we are spiritual in nature, we have more positive thoughts, we have more self-efficacy or a belief system that we can cope. It's even linked to our psychology. We know that spirituality, through the research, is associated with decreased depression. It helps buffer some of these other negative emotions that we might have. It's linked to our social well-being, so our families, our friends. There's even some literature that shows that just participating in church, right? So not other activities, not prayer, not, the feeling connected to God, but just participating in church has positive outcomes for health and adjustment.
She said, that's my advice. She said,
because you have a community, because you are having good positive exchange with people. So the sense of connectedness. So this stuff is intertwined, right? Spirituality is intertwined with our health in these ways. It also, if you think about health behaviors, that's what we call it in psychology, but this is diet, weight, substance use. Spirituality actually modifies that. So people who are higher in spirituality are more likely to have positive health behavior. So less substance use, less risky sexual activity, more exercise, more diet. And so we know that spirituality can impact health through those health behaviors, right? There's an interesting take on spirituality and biology. There's an author who came out with a book called The God Gene, but essentially his research and his argument and, just his line of work shows that there is a gene, there's a gene in our brain, in our DNA, there's a gene in our DNA that might be linked to spirituality. It might predispose us to being more spiritual. It's the VMAT2 gene. But basically, that this is the same gene that's activated with psychoactive drugs. And so, when you think about spirituality's connection with biology, it even shows that, hey, it could be deeper than just, our physical health, that we might actually have markers in our DNA that makes us more likely to manifest spirituality. And then that's protective of health. So really complicated relationships. This diagram is pretty simplistic, but I guess the takeaway here is that all of these things are related in a very intricate way. Next slide, please. So I understand that we have a very diverse group here. And so I wanted to be mindful of the fact that some people may not identify with being spiritual or religious. And that's totally fine. So for me, I think a related concept is this concept of resilience, right? Resilience is studied in a similar fashion. It's studied as a protector of health. It's studied as a factor that could assist with coping with chronic conditions. And if you're here in this moment, you are probably resilient. So simply stated, resilience is your ability to adapt to change, bounce back from illness or hardship. And factors that promote resilience are listed here on this slide. And you see spirituality is one factor that can promote resilience. They probably have a bidirectional relationship, meaning if you're more spiritual, you're more resilient. If you're more resilient, then you're likely to have opportunities to cultivate spirituality. But there's other factors here that I think are important. Cultivating hope, having a calming spirit, finding ways to relax the mind and body, being able to problem solve, having a good sense of agency or self-efficacy, meaning that you can find some sense of control when things feel chaotic, being persistent. All of these things are attached to resilience, okay? And so again, I want to emphasize that resilience can be related to spirituality and being religious. However, we do conceptualize this as a different factor. So you can be both and you can be all of the above, but I just wanted to point this out for people who aren't necessarily identifying as spiritual or religious, that this topic is still relevant, right? Cultivating resilience is still relevant when you're coping with the chronic condition. Next slide, please. So spirituality and religion has been studied with a number of health conditions. I mean, chronic pain, cardiovascular disease, cancer, HIV, AIDS, dental conditions. I mean, there's so much literature on looking at spirituality and religion as a protective factor to coping with these conditions. But there's also good literature on multiple sclerosis specifically. And so I just wanted to point this out to the group. So spirituality has been correlated, predictive, and a mediator of positive adjustment. And so I want to break those relationships down for you because they're fancy statistical words, but they are very meaningful and I think very impactful. What I was saying is that there's literature that looks at spirituality and religion and multiple sclerosis specifically as two factors that could potentially help with coping, help with navigating this chronic condition. And so spirituality has been shown to be correlated, predictive, and a mediator of positive adjustment. So I want to break down those fancy words. And, there's more than just a relationship when you think about statistics. So correlation or something being correlated suggests that there's an association, meaning that as one goes up, another goes up, another factor goes up. So higher spirituality is shown to be correlated with higher positive adjustment. So there's an association there. Research has also shown that it's predictive. So they have various statistical models and ways to guess if something's going to happen in the future, right? That's what we mean by predictive. So spirituality has been shown to predict positive adjustment. And usually the way the research study is designed in a fashion we can say, okay, we're looking at this over time. And this makes sense that if we know someone is spiritual, then down the line, they're going to have positive adjustment. And mediator is a statistical concept that suggests that if you have a stressful situation, such as, there's so many stressful things, pain or anxiety or whatever that stressor is, spirituality is the mediator. That means that if you have this condition, this stressor, and then I put spirituality in the mix in some way, we're cultivating spirituality, then we could potentially mediate whether you're going to have positive adjustment or not. So if you weren't doing so well, and then we stick spirituality in the mix, then we will see that change. We will see you doing better. And so again, this is technical statistics jargon. However, I think it is so impactful and so meaningful to show that really spirituality is so important in this literature with multiple sclerosis, because in so many different directions it's associated with positive adjustment. And by positive adjustment, that means less depression, less anxiety, more self-efficacy, or more greater sense of resilience. That's what we mean by positive adjustment. There's also research specifically within the multiple sclerosis literature that shows that spiritual well-being, so people who report better or higher spiritual well-being, are able to adapt to uncertainty. They also endorse a sense of mastery. So that means that feeling like even when things are out of control or there's uncertainty, that they can develop skills and they can use tools to navigate that uncertainty or stressful situation. So spirituality is associated with adapting to uncertainty, a sense of mastery, feeling like you have the skills and the knowledge to navigate uncertainty. You're learning and can get through times that are stressful, and identity reformation. So what that says is that, once you're diagnosed with a chronic condition, there's a lot of loss associated with that, right? So loss of independence, loss of function, maybe loss of things that haven't even come to fruition yet. So what you thought being a grandmother was going to look like, what you thought your career was going to look like, and sort of your path has to change because of this diagnosis. And that shifts your identity. All of a sudden, unexpectedly, you have to figure out well, who am I now? And what is my life going to look like? You have to go through that very difficult process. And so spirituality is associated with helping that process along identity reformation. In the literature, spiritual and religious beliefs have been associated with meaning making. So that's a fancy word for trying to understand why certain things happen in life, negative things, positive reframing. Spiritual and religious beliefs has been associated with leading to greater life satisfaction. So these studies are done on people who have multiple sclerosis diagnosis. And so that's how they're able to make the relationship. They say, how religious are you, or how spiritual are you? And are you satisfied with your life? And they've shown a relationship there, as well as positive adjustment. There's been some research on spiritual counseling and how that promotes hope. And remember, hope is associated with resilience as well. And again, this is sort of technical research design stuff, but I think, this is significant that longitudinally, so that means that studying people who have been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis over time show that when there is increased religious or faith beliefs, that those benefits are obvious in middle to later stages of multiple sclerosis diagnosis. And so I say that because longitudinal designs are not done often. They are a heavy lift. They require a lot of resources and money. So the fact that you have research dollars and you have researchers looking at this, to me, with my research ears, that says this is important. This is significant. This is critical to dedicate the type of resources to understanding how spirituality impacts our health and our ability to cope with our health. And then the last point here is that qualitatively, religion ranked as number 2 of how people with multiple sclerosis cope. So qualitative design means that, again, this is a heavy lift. We don't see a lot of qualitative research in the field because it's a lot of resources, it's a lot of time. But again, this stuff is significant enough for, scholars to dedicate resources to. But qualitative research is they go and they ask people. They're not just giving them measures and say, hey, check some boxes. They're saying, tell me about how religion has impacted your life. Tell me about how you are coping with multiple sclerosis. So it's pages and pages and pages of interviews, and they're able to get results when enough themes come up. They're able to stop the interviews. So they interviewed lots of people and got lots of answers, and religion came up as number 2 for coping with MS. You're probably wondering what number 1 was that they interviewed all these people. And number 1 was, well, we just accept it. That was the number 1 coping strategy. But again, I don't want to simplify that because I think coming to a place of acceptance really requires a lot of searching, internal, beyond you. And so, this is when some of those other bigger concepts that are related to spirituality come into place. I don't think it's easy for people just to, I wake up one day and I accept it, that there's some work done, maybe unconsciously. So I don't want to simplify it. But again, I think the point here is that spirituality is important when it comes to coping, and particularly with multiple sclerosis. And there's been research and resources dedicated to really showing this relationship. Next slide, please. So there's even literature and research that's done to look at caregivers of those of multiple sclerosis. And so because spirituality just sticks out as something that can be protective and useful, they said, well, let's broaden the scope of what we're doing. Let's look at those who provide care for persons with multiple sclerosis, because caregiver stress is studied a lot, caregiver burden. But I really can appreciate this literature because, it gives the other side of the continuum, right? It gives the positive side. We know that caregiving is a labor of love. And so I think oftentimes that gets missed, and it's too much focus on, how the difficulty it may bring. But what the research is showing is that religious and spiritual beliefs are associated with meaning making and caregivers of those who have multiple sclerosis. So again, the caregiver's ability to say, let me figure out what all this means. Let me figure out what this means for my life. Let me find positivity and awe in this calling that has come to me. Religious and spiritual beliefs have also been associated with life satisfaction. So caregivers who are more spiritual or religious say that they are satisfied with life, that they have a greater sense of quality of life. Marital status is also associated with it. So again, that means that in those who endorse more religious and spiritual beliefs, that they are more likely to be married. And then, which is interesting, there's even a spillover, right? So that the partner or the spouse of the caregiver also endorses more meaning making and life satisfaction when religion and spirituality are in the equation.